The smoke hung thick in the air of Murphy's Bar, a small drinking place on the edge of known space, the planet Kepler 442b, was not much to look at. Just another rock where travelers stopped to refuel and rest, but tonight, the bar was full of stories and old soldiers who had lived through things most beings could never imagine. Commander Zextai sat in the corner booth, his green-scaled hands wrapped around a glass of bitter alien liquor. His yellow eyes moved slowly across the room, taking in the faces of other veterans. There were Cathari warriors with their forearms crossed over their chests, Zerglings tapping their claws on metal tables, and even a few of the ghost pale Varak who rarely left their home worlds. All of them had one thing in common: they had fought against humans and lived to tell about it. The bar owner, an old century with gray fur, called out from behind the counter, "Hey Zextai, tell us another story the new kids here haven't heard about the war." Zextai looked up and saw several young aliens sitting at nearby tables. Their eyes were bright and eager, the way soldiers looked before they learned what real war was like. He remembered being that young once back when he thought the galactic hegemony was the strongest force in the universe. "You want to hear about humans?" Zextai asked, his voice rough from too many years of shouting orders in battle. The young soldiers nodded quickly. Zextai took a long drink and set his glass down with a heavy thud. "Then listen well. What I am about to tell you might save your lives someday." The bar grew quiet. Even the music from the old sound system seemed to fade away. "It was 15 years ago when we first met them," Zexati began. "The year 2387 by their count. We thought we knew everything about war. The hegemony had conquered 47 different species. We had rules for how new aliens would react. When we found them, they would either run away in fear, try to fight us with their weak weapons, or beg us to leave them alone." He paused and looked around the room. "Humans did none of these things." A young Cathari warrior leaned forward. "What did they do?" "They studied us," Zextai said simply. "But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me start at the beginning." Zextai's eyes grew distant as he remembered that day. "I was serving on the battleship Iron Claw when our sensors picked up a strange ship near the edge of hegemony space. It was small and moved in ways we had never seen before. The ship's hull was made of materials we did not recognize, and it was sending out signals in a language our computers could not understand." The commander traced a scar on his left arm, a habit he had picked up over the years. "Admiral Gork ordered us to capture the ship. It should have been easy. Their vessel was tiny compared to our warships. We thought it would be over minutes. The ship tried to run when they saw us coming. This was normal. Most species try to escape when they first see hegemony ships, but this ship was fast, faster than anything we had ever seen. It took us 3 hours to catch them, and only because they ran out of fuel." Zergling clicked its claws impatiently. "So you caught them. What was special about that?" Zextai smiled, but it was not a happy smile. "When we brought them aboard our ship, they did not act like other prisoners. Most aliens would cry or beg or try to attack us. These humans did something different. They watched everything." The old commander leaned back in his seat. Their leader was a male called Captain Jake Morrison. He was tall for a human, with dark hair and calm blue eyes. When our guards brought him to the prisoner holding area, he did not look afraid. Instead, he looked around at our ship like he was trying to memorize every detail. Morrison asked our guards questions, not the usual things like "please let me go" or "what are you going to do to us?" He asked about our weapons, our ship design, how many crew members we had. The guards thought he was crazy and ignored him. Zextai took another drink. But Morrison was not crazy. He was gathering information. The young soldiers in the bar exchanged glances. This was not the kind of story they had expected. There were 4 other humans with Morrison. Zextai continued. A female engineer named Lisa Banks, communications officer called Ryan Carter, a pilot named Sam Rodriguez, and a scientist named Helen Foster. At first, our intelligence officers thought they were a simple exploration crew. We were wrong. Within hours of being captured, the humans had learned the layout of our ship. Banks, the engineer, had watched the guard patrols and figured out their timing. Carter had started learning our language just by listening to conversations in the hallways. Rodriguez was studying our ship's movement patterns, and Foster was analyzing everything from the air we breathed to the metal in our walls. One of the young Cathari warriors laughed. 5 prisoners against a crew of 800. What could they possibly do? Sextai's yellow eyes fixed on the young warrior. They could think, and that made them more dangerous than any weapon, though. Wow, bar was completely silent now. Even the bartender had stopped cleaning glasses to listen. On the second day, Morrison requested a meeting with Admiral Gorthik. This was unusual, but the Admiral was curious about these strange new aliens. He agreed to see the human captain. Zextai paused, remembering that meeting. He had been there standing guard behind the Admiral's desk. Morrison walked into the Admiral's office like he owned the place. He did not bow or show fear. Instead, he sat down in the chair across from Gorek and smiled, a real smile, like he was meeting an old friend. The Admiral asked Morrison about his species and their technology, standard questions for a new alien race. But Morrison turned the conversation around. He started asking Gork about hegemony, military tactics, about our wars with other species, about our plans for expansion. Gorek was amused. He thought he was dealing with a primitive creature who did not understand his situation, so he answered some of Morrison's questions. He even bragged about our recent victories. Zextai shook his head slowly. The Admiral had no idea he was being interrogated by an expert. Morrison listened to everything and asked follow-up questions that seemed innocent but were not. By the end of the meeting, he had learned more about hegemony military structure than most of our own officers knew. The old commander looked around the room at the faces watching him, but that was not the strangest part. At the end of the meeting, Morrison thanked the Admiral for his time. Then he said something that still gives me chills. What did he say? Asked a young Zergling. Morrison looked straight at Admiral Gork and said, I hope we can work together instead of fighting each other. War is expensive and peace is profitable for everyone. Then he stood up, shook the Admiral's hand like they were business partners, and walked back to his cell. Zext finished his drink and signaled for another one. We thought Morrison was weak, trying to make deals instead of fighting. We did not understand that he was giving us a choice: work with humans or face the Consequences: 3 days later, a rescue ship arrived. The young soldiers leaned forward eagerly, but Zextai held up a scaled hand. That is a story for another night, but I will tell you this much. The rescue ship was not what we expected, and after that day everything changed. The old commander stood up slowly, his joints creaking after too many years of war. Remember what I have told you. Tonight, humans do not fight like other species. They do not fight with honor or glory or rage. They fight to win, and they are very good at it. As Zexta walked toward the door, one of the young warriors called out, "Commander, why are you telling us this? Are you trying to scare us?" Zextai turned back, his yellow eyes reflecting the dim light of the bar. "I am trying to keep you alive, because if you ever face humans in battle, your only chance is to remember that they are always thinking 3 steps ahead of you." The door slid shut behind him, leaving the young soldiers to think about his words. Outside, the twin moons of Kepler 442 B cast long shadows across the spaceport where ships from a dozen different worlds sat waiting for dawn. The next evening, Commander Zexta returned to Murphy's bar. Word had spread about his story, and tonight the place was packed with soldiers from across the galaxy. They had come to hear more about the humans and their strange ways of war. Zextai took his usual seat in the corner booth and ordered his drink. The young warriors from the night before were there again, along with many other. Their faces showed curiosity mixed with doubt. Most of them still believed that strength and size mattered most in battle. "You came back for more stories," Zextai said, looking around the crowded room. "Good. Tonight I will tell you about the first time humans in the hegemony fought in real combat." A large Cathari warrior with scars covering his forearm spoke up. "Commander, yesterday you told us about prisoners asking questions. That is not fighting. When did the real war begin?" Zextai smiled, his cold smile again. 3 days after we captured Morrison and his crew. Their rescue ship arrived, but it was not really a rescue ship. It was a test. The old commander took a sip of his drink and continued. "The ship that came for the humans was called the Liberty Bell. It was smaller than our smallest patrol vessel, with only 12 crew members. Their captain was a female named Carol Martinez. When she contacted us, she did not demand the return of their people or threaten us with war. Instead, Captain Martinez made a formal request. She wanted to invoke the ancient laws of trial by combat to determine the fate of her crew members. This was an old tradition that most species had forgotten, but it was still part of hegemony law. A young Zergling clicked his claws in confusion. "Trial by combat. They wanted to fight us one-on-one. That is exactly what they wanted," Zextai replied, and Admiral Gork thought it was the funniest thing he had ever heard. Here was a tiny species that had just discovered space travel, challenging the mighty hegemony to single combat. The bar grew quiet as everyone leaned in to listen. The Admiral accepted the challenge immediately. He thought it would be good entertainment for the crew. According to the old laws, each side would choose one champion to fight on a neutral location. The winner would decide the fate of both groups. Zextai paused to let this sink in. The Admiral chose Gorthak the Destroyer as our champion. Gorthak was the largest and strongest warrior in the hegemony fleet. He stood 9 ft tall and weighed as much as 3 normal beings. His skin was like armor and his forearms could crush steel. He had never lost a fight. The soldiers in the bar nodded. Approvingly, they knew of Gorthak's reputation. We expected the humans to send their biggest male. Morrison was tall and looked strong, but when the day of combat arrived, the humans surprised us again. Zextai's voice grew soft as if he was sharing a secret. They sent a female. Her name was Sergeant Amy Rodriguez. She was small even for a human, maybe 5'12" ft tall and weighing perhaps 130 lb. She looked like a child compared to Gorthak. Several aliens in the bar laughed, but Zextai held up his hand for silence. We thought the humans had given up. They were sending someone to die quickly so the rest of them could surrender with honor. Even Captain Martinez looked calm, like she expected this outcome. The combat was set to take place on Titan 7, a small moon with low gravity and rocky terrain. Both fighters were allowed to bring basic weapons, but no powered armor or energy shields. It was supposed to be a test of natural fighting ability. Zextai closed his eyes for a moment, remembering that day. I was there along with 100 other hegemony officers. We wanted to watch our champion destroy this tiny human female. The fight was being broadcast to both fleets. When Rodriguez stepped onto the fighting ground, she looked around carefully. She was not looking at Gorthak. She was studying the rocks, the gravity, the lighting, everything about the environment. Gorthak just stood there, flexing his muscles and roaring challenges. The fight began with a sound from the referee's horn. Gorthak charged forward like a wild beast, his forearms reaching out to grab Rodriguez and crush her. He was fast for his size, but Rodriguez was already moving. The old commander leaned forward, his voice growing intense. What happened next changed everything we thought we knew about combat. Rodriguez did not try to meet Gorthak's charge or run away from it. Instead, she used the moon's low gravity to her advantage. She jumped higher than any of us thought possible and landed on a rocky outcrop above Gorthak's head. Before Gorthak could turn around, Rodriguez had kicked loose a pile of stones. They fell on his head and shoulders, not doing much damage, but confusing him. While he was brushing off the rocks, she jumped down behind him and struck at the back of his knee with a metal rod. Gorthak spun around with a roar of anger, but Rodriguez was already gone. She had rolled away and was climbing up another rock formation. She was using the terrain like it was part of her body. A young Vorek warrior spoke up, his pale face showing confusion. But how could such a small being defeat a champion like Gorthak? Surely size and strength matter in combat. Zextai nodded slowly. That is what we all thought, but Rodriguez was not trying to overpower Gorthak. She was trying to outsmart him. Every move she made had a purpose. She was not just fighting one battle. She was fighting 10 battles ahead. For 20 minutes, Rodriguez led Gorak around the fighting ground like she was training a pet. She would appear from behind a rock, strike at his legs or arms, then disappear before he could respond. Each attack was small, but they added up. Gorak grew frustrated and angry. He started making mistakes. He would charge at Rodriguez and miss, crashing into rocks. He would swing all 4 arms at once and lose his balance. Rodriguez never looked tired or worried. She looked like she was working, doing a job that needed to be done. The soldiers in the bar were completely silent now, hanging on every word. The end came suddenly. Gorak had been chasing Rodriguez around a large boulder when she suddenly stopped running. She turned to face him with a strange metal device in her hands. We could not see what it was from our viewing position. Gorthak rushed forward, thinking he finally had her trapped, but Rodriguez had been leading him to that exact spot for a reason. She pressed a button on her device and the ground under Gorthak's feet exploded. Several aliens gasped. Surprised she had explosives, asked Cathari. No, Zextai replied she had been carrying small charges the entire fight, placing them in cracks in the rocks as she moved around. Every time she touched a stone or rolled behind a boulder, she was setting up her trap. By the end of the fight, she had turned the entire battlefield into a weapon. When the rocks exploded, Gorak fell into a pit that Rodriguez had created. He was not seriously hurt, but he was trapped and confused. Rodriguez stood at the edge of the pit, looking down at him. And then she did something that shocked everyone watching. She offered Gorak her hand to help him climb out. The bar erupted in confused voices. What? Why would she help her enemy? Zextai raised his voice to be heard over the noise. Because she had already won. The trial by combat was over. Rodriguez had proven that humans could defeat hegemony champions, but instead of gloating or celebrating, she showed mercy to a defeated opponent. Gorthak was so surprised that he actually took her hand and let her help him out of the pit. When he stood up, Rodriguez offered him a drink of water from her supply. She treated him with respect, like a worthy opponent instead of an enemy. The old commander finished his drink and looked around the room. That was when we realized that humans were not like other species. They did not fight for glory or revenge or conquest. They fought to solve problems, and when the problem was solved, they moved on to the next challenge. Admiral Gorth was forced to release Morrison and his crew according to the ancient laws, but as the humans prepared to leave, Morrison made another request. He asked for a formal meeting between human and hegemony representatives to discuss trade and cooperation. The admiral agreed, thinking it would be a simple negotiation. He had no idea that the humans had learned everything they needed to know about our military capabilities just from watching one fight. Zextai stood up to leave, but a young warrior called out, "Commander, what happened at the meeting? Did they make a deal?" The old commander turned back with that cold smile. "Oh, they made a deal, but it was not the kind of deal the admiral expected." The humans had been preparing for that meeting since the moment they were captured. They knew exactly what they wanted, and they knew exactly how to get it. But that is a story for tomorrow night. Tonight, think about what you have learned. Humans do not fight like warriors. They fight like scientists, always learning, always adapting, always thinking ahead. Remember that if you ever face them in battle. As Zextai walked out into the night, the soldiers in Murphy's bar sat in stunned silence. They had come expecting to hear about glorious battles and heroic charges. Instead, they had learned about a species that treated war like a puzzle to be solved. Outside, the spaceport was busy with ships arriving and departing. Among them was a small human transport vessel, its crew probably unaware of the stories being told about their species in the bars and meeting halls across the galaxy. By the third night, Murphy's bar could not hold all the beings who came. To hear Commander Xtai stories, soldiers stood in the doorway and pressed against the windows, straining to listen. Word had spread across the entire spaceport about the human tales, and even civilian traders had come to hear about this strange species. Zextai arrived to find his usual corner booth surrounded by eager faces. The bartender had set up extra speakers so everyone could hear clearly. The old commander settled into his seat and looked around at the crowd. With his yellow eyes, "Tonight you will learn why the hegemony made its greatest mistake," he began without waiting for quiet. His voice carried easily through the sound system. After the trial by combat, our leaders thought they understood humans. They believed Rodriguez had won through luck and trickery. They decided to test human military strength with what they called minor conflicts. A scarred Cathari veteran near the bar called out, "How minor were these conflicts, Commander?" Zexadi's expression grew dark. The High Council selected 3 human colonies for what they called evaluation raids. These were supposed to be simple attacks against defenseless settlements. The goal was to measure human response time, weapon capability, and fighting spirit. He paused and took a long drink. First target was a colony ship called the Spirit of Denver. Our intelligence reported it as a standard civilian transport with 300 families aboard. No military escort, no weapons, no defenses. It seemed perfect for a quick raid. The attack force was led by Captain Vexthal of the raider ship Blood Fang. He had conducted dozens of successful raids against other species. The plan was simple: disable the colony ship, take some prisoners, gather intelligence, and leave before any human military forces could respond. Young soldiers throughout the bar leaned forward with interest. This sounded like the kind of straightforward battle they understood. Captain Vexthal approached the Spirit of Denver with confidence. The human ship was moving slowly through empty space, exactly where our scouts had predicted. It showed no signs of detecting the Blood Fang's approach. Everything looked normal. Zextai's voice grew quieter, forcing everyone to listen more carefully. Vexthal opened communications and demanded the human surrender. This was standard procedure. Most species would panic and submit immediately when faced with hegemony raiders. The response came from the ship's captain, a human female named Carol Wright. Her voice was calm and polite when she answered Vexel's demands. She said her people were peaceful colonists who wanted no trouble. She asked if there was some way they could avoid conflict. Vexthal was pleased. This was exactly the response he expected from frightened civilians. He told Wright to prepare for boarding and promised that no one would be harmed if they cooperated. The old commander's eyes grew distant as he remembered that day. What happened next changed everything the hegemony thought it knew about human civilians. As the Blood Fang moved closer to board the colony ship, Wright's voice came over the communications again. She thanked Vextol for his patience and said her people had voted on his offer. Then she said something that still gives me chills when I remember it. What did she say? Asked the young Zergling, his claws tapping nervously on the table. Wright said, "Captain, my people have decided that we would rather die free than live as slaves. We're sorry it has to be this way." Then she cut the communication channel. Zexta looked around the crowded bar. For 30 Seconds nothing happened. The two ships drifted silently through space. Vexel was confused by Wright's response, but not worried. What could a ship full of farmers and families do against trained raiders? Then the spirit of Denver opened fire. The bar erupted in surprised voices. A colony ship had weapons? How is that possible? Zextai held up his scaled hand for silence. The humans had not installed traditional weapons. Instead, they had converted their mining equipment into missile launchers. Construction drones became attack fighters. Farming robots turned into boarding parties. In less than 10 minutes, the entire colony ship had transformed from a peaceful transport into a warship. But that was not the most shocking part. Every modification had been planned and prepared in advance. Wright and her people had spent months converting their ship while pretending to be helpless civilians. They had been ready for this attack long before it happened. A veteran Vorak warrior spoke up from the back of the room. How could they know the attack was coming? They didn't know when or where. Zextai replied, but they knew it would happen eventually. The humans had studied hegemony behavior patterns. After the trial by combat, they predicted that we would test them with raids against soft targets. The old commander's voice grew heavy with memory. The battle lasted 6 hours. The Blood Fang was larger and better armed than the colony ship, but Wright's people fought like they had been training for war their entire lives. Every colonist had a job to do, from children running messages to elderly humans operating weapon systems. Vexthal tried every tactic he knew. He attempted to ram the colony ship, but Wright used her ship's mining charges to damage his engines. He sent boarding parties, but the humans had turned their corridors into mazes filled with traps. He even tried to retreat, but Wright's people had disabled his faster-than-light drive with some kind of computer virus. In the end, Vexthal was forced to surrender to avoid losing his entire crew. But that was when the real surprise came. The soldiers throughout Murphy's bar waited breathlessly for the rest of the story. Wright accepted Vexthal's surrender and took his crew prisoner, but she did not execute them or torture them for information. Instead, she had them treated by human doctors for their injuries. She fed them and gave them comfortable places to rest while her people were caring for the prisoners. Wright was doing something else. She was studying every piece of hegemony technology on the Blood Fang. She took detailed recordings of their weapons, their computers, their communication systems, everything. Zexati finished his drink and signaled for another. 3 days later, Wright released Vexthal and his crew. She returned them to their damaged ship, along with enough supplies to make repairs, but she kept all the intelligence she had gathered. Vexthal was grateful to be alive, but he was also confused. He asked Wright why she had shown mercy to raiders who had come to enslave her people. The old commander's voice grew soft again. Wright's answer became famous throughout human space. She told Vexthal that her people did not enjoy killing, even self-defense. She said they hoped that someday humans and the hegemony could be friends instead of enemies. But until that day came, they would be ready to defend themselves. As Vexthal's ship limped away from the battle, Wright sent a message to every human colony and military base in their territory. The message contained complete technical specifications of hegemony weapons, ship designs, and tactical doctrines. A young Cathari warrior stood up, his forearms crossed in confusion. Commander, you said this was the first of 3 raids. What happened to the other 2? Zextai smiled grimly. The second raid was led by Commander Drathel against a human mining station called New Pittsburgh. By the time his ships arrived, the humans had already received Wright's intelligence package. They were waiting. Drathel found himself facing opponents who knew exactly how his weapons worked and had prepared specific countermeasures. The mining station had been converted into a fortress using the humans' new knowledge of hegemony technology. The battle lasted only 2 hours. Drathel's entire raider fleet was captured or destroyed. Not a single human was killed. The bar had grown completely silent. Even the background music seemed to have stopped. The third raid never happened. Zextai continued. By then, human colonies across their territory had shared rights, intelligence data. Every settlement, every transport ship, every outpost was prepared for hegemony attacks. But the humans did not stop there. While our commanders were trying to understand how civilians had defeated trained raiders, human intelligence officers were analyzing everything they had learned about us. Zextai stood up slowly, his old joints creaking. Within weeks of the first raid, humans knew more about hegemony, military capabilities than most of our own officers. They had studied our tactics, our psychology, our weaknesses, and they had begun preparing for the real war they knew was coming. You see, the raids were not just defeats for the hegemony, they were learning opportunities for the humans. Every attack we made gave them more intelligence, more understanding of how we thought and fought. A veteran zergling near the door called out, "Commander, how did the High Council react when they learned about the failed raids?" Zextai's yellow eyes gleamed in the dim light of the bar. The High Council was furious. They had been humiliated by a species they considered primitive. They decided that humans were too dangerous to leave alone. The order went out to prepare for total war, but the humans were already 3 steps ahead of us. While we were planning our first major offensive, they were building something the galaxy had never seen before. They were creating a war machine that could think. The old commander moved toward the door, then turned back to face the crowded room. "Tomorrow night I will tell you about the Battle of Proxima Station." Word about Commander Zextai's stories had spread beyond the spaceport. On the 4th night, Murphy's bar was so crowded that the owner had to set up speakers outside for the overflow crowd. Military officers from 3 different sectors had traveled to Kepler 442b, specifically to hear the human war tales. Zextai entered to find his usual booth occupied by a hegemony general, but the high-ranking officer immediately stood and offered the seat to the old storyteller. Even the most powerful military leaders wanted to hear these accounts firsthand. The bar fell silent as Zextai settled into his seat. His yellow eyes swept across the packed room, taking in faces he had never seen before. Young cadets stood beside grizzled veterans, all waiting for the next chapter of the human story. "Tonight I will tell you about the Battle of Proxima Station," Zextai began, his voice carrying clearly through the sound system. "This is where we learned that humans do not just fight with weapons and ships. They fight with ideas that can break an enemy's mind." He paused to let his words sink in. After the failed raids, the Hegemony High Council declared total war on humanity. Fleet Admiral Korax was given command of the largest battle force in our history, 200 warships, 50,000 troops, and enough firepower to destroy entire planets. A young officer near the front asked, surely the humans could not stand against such a force. Zextai's scaled lips curved into that cold smile. The humans had one space station at Proxima Centauri and maybe 30 ships to defend it. By every measure of military strength, they should have been wiped out in hours, but Admiral Corfax was not fighting normal opponents. He was facing Colonel Dan Murphy and the Human Defense Force. Murphy had been expecting this attack for months, and he had prepared something special for the Hegemony fleet. The old commander took a sip of his drink. When our massive fleet arrived at Proxima Station, Murphy opened communications immediately. This surprised Corfax, who expected the humans to either run away or fight desperately. Instead, Murphy wanted to talk. Murphy appeared on the main screen of Corfax's flagship. He was a middle-aged human with gray hair and calm blue eyes. He looked like someone's grandfather, not a military commander. Facing impossible odds, Korax demanded the station's immediate surrender. Murphy listened politely, then made a counter-proposal. He suggested that Korax turn his fleet around and leave human space voluntarily. He said this would save lives on both sides. Several aliens in the bar laughed at this, but Zextai held up his hand. Korax thought it was a joke too. He told Murphy that he had 30 minutes to evacuate all civilians from the station. Before the attack began, Murphy thanked Corfax for his concern about innocent lives. Then he said something that made everyone on the Hegemony Command bridge uncomfortable. He said he was recording the conversation and would make sure that history remembered Korax as an honorable warrior who tried to protect non-combatants. This confused our admiral. Murphy was about to die, but he was talking about history and honor. Corfax asked Murphy if he understood the hopelessness of his situation. Zextai's voice grew quieter, forcing everyone to lean in. Murphy's response changed everything. He said, Admir, I understand my situation perfectly. The question is, do you understand yours? Before Corfax could ask what Murphy meant, strange things began happening. Throughout the Hegemony fleet, ships started receiving radio broadcasts in their own languages, but the messages were not coming from other Hegemony vessels. A Zergling officer clicked his claws impatiently. What kind of messages? Personal messages, Zextai replied. Individual crew members were hearing their own names called over the communication systems. The broadcast contained information about their families, their home planets, their personal histories, information that should have been impossible for humans to obtain. Captain Nicole Barnes, Murphy's intelligence officer, had spent months studying every alien species in the galaxy. She knew how different races thought, what they feared, what motivated them, and she used that knowledge as a weapon. The old commander's eyes grew distant as he remembered that terrifying day. The Zergling crews heard voices speaking to them as individuals, not as parts of the hive mind. This drove many of them to panic and confusion. Cathari warriors received challenges to single combat from humans they had never met, but the challenges included personal insults about their honor and fighting ability. The Vorak crews heard human children singing lullabies in perfect Vorak language. This sounds harmless, but Vorak considered children's voices to be sacred. Hearing them used in war was deeply disturbing to their religious beliefs. A pale Vorak veteran in the back of the bar nodded grimly. Psychological warfare, but how did they learn so much about our cultures? The same way they learned everything else, Zextai answered. They studied us during the months after the failed raids. Human intelligence agents had been gathering information about every species in the hegemony. They interviewed refugees, analyzed our public broadcasts, even studied our art and literature, but the broadcasts were just the beginning. As the hegemony fleet prepared to attack, Murphy implemented what he called Protocol Omega. This was a battle plan unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Zextai finished his drink and immediately signaled for another. The human ships did not form battle lines or charge at our fleet. Instead, they scattered in all directions, moving in patterns that seemed random. Our tactical computers could not predict their movements or target them effectively. Admiral Corfax ordered the attack to begin anyway. Our ships opened fire with everything they had, but the humans were never where our weapons expected them to be. They moved like they could read our minds. That is when we realized that Murphy's people were not just dodging our attacks, they were studying them. Every shot we fired gave them more information about our weapons, our targeting systems, our tactical thinking. The bar was completely silent, now hanging on every word. After an hour of missing their targets, some of our ship captains began to panic. The stress of the psychological broadcast, combined with their inability to hit the enemy, was breaking down military discipline. That is when Murphy sprung his real trap. The human ships suddenly stopped running and turned to attack. But they were not attacking our strongest ships. They were targeting the vessels whose crews were most affected by the psychological warfare. Captain Barnes had identified which ships contained the most vulnerable crew members. The humans hit these vessels with precise, devastating attacks while continuing their psychological broadcasts to the rest of the fleet. Zextai's voice grew heavy with memory. Ship after ship began to surrender or retreat without orders, not because they were beaten in battle, but because their crews could not handle the mental pressure of fighting an enemy that seemed to know everything about them. Admiral Corex tried to maintain order, but Murphy had anticipated this too. Every time Corfax issued a command, the humans would broadcast a prediction of what that command would be. They would announce his orders before he gave them. Young Cathari warrior stood up, his forearms shaking with emotion. How could they know what our admiral was thinking? Because they had studied him, Zexti replied simply. Murphy's intelligence team had analyzed every battle Corex had ever fought. They knew his patterns, his preferences, his weaknesses. They could predict his decisions because they understood how his mind worked. The final blow came when Murphy offered individual surrender terms to each ship in our fleet, not general terms for everyone, but specific deals tailored to each crew's needs and fears. Zergling ships were promised that individual crew members would be allowed to maintain their personal identities. The Cathari were offered the chance to face human warriors in honorable single combat, the Vorik were guaranteed that their religious practices would be respected. Within 6 hours, half of the hegemony fleet had accepted Murphy's surrender terms. They were not defeated by superior firepower or better tactics. They were defeated by an enemy that understood them better than they understood themselves. Zextai stood up slowly, his old joints protesting. Admiral Corfax was forced to retreat with what remained of his fleet, the largest military force in hegemony. History had been broken not by human weapons but by human knowledge, but the most disturbing part came after the battle. Murphy contacted Corfax directly and invited him to a private meeting. Our admiral expected threats or demands for reparations. Instead, Murphy offered Korak's medical treatment for his crews and safe passage home. He also gave the admiral a complete recording of the battle along with detailed analysis of what had gone wrong and how it could have been avoided. The old commander moved toward the door, then turned back to face the crowd. Murphy told Corfax that humans did not want to destroy the hegemony, they wanted to understand us. He said that understanding was the first step toward peace. The admiral asked Murphy why he was being so generous to a defeated enemy. Murphy's answer became famous throughout both human and hegemony space. Zextai paused at the doorway. Murphy said, "Admir, we fought this battle not to prove we could beat you, but to prove that we don't have to." By the fifth night, Murphy's bar could no longer contain the crowds that came to hear Commander Xtai's final story. The owner had set up a large screen outside the building, and hundreds of beings gathered in the spaceport plaza to listen. Military commanders, civilian traders, and even some diplomats had arrived from across the sector. Zextai walked through the crowd slowly, his yellow eyes taking in faces from dozens of different species. Many were veterans who had fought in the war he was describing. Others were young beings who had grown up in the peace that followed. All of them wanted to hear how the story ended. Inside the bar, a special table had been set up near the front for senior military officers. The bartender had brought out his finest liquor for the occasion. Everyone knew this would be the last night of stories, and no one wanted to miss it. Zextai took his seat and looked around the packed room. Outside, the crowd pressed close to the windows and speakers. The old commander had never imagined that his memories would draw such attention. "Tonight I will tell you about the end of the war," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the sound system. "This is the story of the Battle of Edge Nebula, where the hegemony and humanity met for the final time as enemies." The crowd fell silent immediately. Even the background noise from the spaceport seemed to fade away. After the defeat at Proxima Station, the Hegemony High Council was desperate. They had lost face in front of the entire galaxy. Other species were beginning to question hegemony's strength and authority. Something had to be done to restore their reputation. Zextai paused to take a drink. Council decided to gather every available ship and warrior for one massive assault on the human home system. This would not be a test or a raid. This would be total war aimed at completely destroying humanity. Fleet Admiral Gorthful was chosen to lead this final offensive. He was the most experienced commander in the hegemony military, a veteran of 30 successful campaigns. Under his command were 800 warships and 2 million soldiers, a young Zergling officer near the front asked. Surely this force was large enough to defeat the humans by every measure of military power. Yes, Zextai replied. The human fleet was much smaller, maybe 200 ships under the command of Fleet Admiral Rebecca Stone. On paper it should have been a massacre, but Admiral Stone was not just any human commander. She had been studying hegemony tactics for years, ever since the first contact with Captain Morrison. She knew exactly how we thought, how we fought, and most importantly, how we made mistakes. The old commander's voice grew thoughtful. The battle took place in the Edge Nebula, a region of space filled with gas clouds and radiation that interfered with sensors and communications. Gorthel chose this location because he thought it would prevent the humans from using their superior coordination and intelligence sharing. He was wrong. Stone had been preparing for this battle in this exact location for months. Her people knew every gas cloud, every radiation field, every hiding place in the nebula. They had turned the entire battlefield into their home territory. Zextai looked around the room at the faces watching him. When the two fleets met, something unprecedented happened. The humans did not try to avoid battle or negotiate. Instead, Admiral Stone opened communications and made an announcement that shocked everyone. What did she say? Asked a Vorthak veteran, his pale face leaning forward with interest. Stone told Gorthel that she respected him as a warrior and understood that he was following orders from his government. She said that many humans considered him an honorable opponent. Then she offered him one final chance to end the war without more bloodshed. Gorthel was insulted by this offer. He had come to destroy humanity, not to make peace with them. He told Stone that surrender was the only option he would accept. Stone listened to his response calmly, then said something that became famous throughout human space. She told Gorthel, Admiral, I understand your position, but I want you to understand mine. We did not choose this war, but we will finish it. Bar was completely quiet now. Even the sounds from outside seemed muted. Battle began with the largest space engagement in galactic history. 800 hegemony ships against 200 human vessels, but within the first hour it became clear that numbers alone would not decide this fight. The human ships moved through the nebula like they had been born there. They appeared out of gas clouds to strike at hegemony formations, then disappeared before return fire could reach them. Every attack was precisely planned and perfectly executed. Zexti's voice grew heavy with memory, but this was not just another human victory through superior tactics. This was something different. Stone's people were not just trying to win the battle, they were demonstrating everything they had learned about warfare. Every ship in the human fleet fought like it knew exactly what every other ship was doing. They shared information instantly, adapted to changing conditions immediately, and supported each other perfectly. It was like watching a single organism with 200 bodies. Admiral Gorthel tried every strategy he knew. He divided his fleet to attack from multiple directions, but the humans predicted and countered every move. He concentrated his forces for massive attacks, but the humans scattered his formations with precision strikes. A Cathari general stood up, his forearms crossed in confusion. Commander, how could so few ships defeat so many? What weapon did the humans use? Knowledge, Zextai replied. Simply, the humans had spent years studying not just our technology and tactics but our psychology, our culture, our very nature. They knew us better than we knew ourselves. After 6 hours of battle, something extraordinary happened. Admiral Stone's flagship, the Earth's Promise, broke away from the main human formation and headed straight for Gorthal's command ship. Our admiral thought Stone was attempting a desperate ramming attack. He ordered all nearby ships to destroy the human vessel before it could reach him, but the Earth's Promise was not alone. Dozens of human ships formed a protective corridor, sacrificing themselves to protect their admiral's advance. The old commander's voice grew soft with respect. Stone's ship reached the hegemony flagship and locked onto it with docking clamps. Instead of exploding or trying to board, Stone did something no one expected. She requested a personal meeting with Gorthal. Our admiral was trapped. His ship was damaged and unable to break free from the human vessel. His fleet was scattered and confused by the ongoing battle. He had no choice but to agree to the meeting. What happened in that meeting changed the course of galactic history. Zexati continued. Stone came aboard the hegemony flagship. Alone, carrying no weapons, she walked onto our command bridge and saluted Admiral Gorthal with proper military respect. Then she did something that no hegemony commander had ever experienced. She offered to surrender her entire fleet to end the bloodshed. Several aliens in the bar gasped surprise. She offered to surrender while she was winning. Stone told Gorth Val that humans had proven they could fight and win against any opponent, but she said that victory in battle was meaningless if it did not lead to peace. She offered to surrender her fleet if Gorthal would agree to negotiations between human and hegemony representatives. Our admiral was completely confused by this offer. His experience, the winning side, dictated terms to the losers. He had never encountered an enemy who offered defeat in order to achieve larger goals. Zexti finished his drink and sat back in his chair, but Stone was not finished. She told Gorth Val that humans had studied the hegemony's history and understood that their empire was built on fear and conquest. She said that such empires always eventually collapsed because they created only enemies, never friends. Then Stone made her final offer. She proposed that humans and the hegemony work together to build something better, not an empire based on conquest, but an alliance based on cooperation and mutual benefit. Admiral Gorthal asked Stone why humanity would want to ally with former enemies. Her answer ended the war. The old commander looked around the packed bar, his yellow eyes reflecting the dim lights. Stone told Gorthal that humans had learned something important during the war. She said they had discovered that the galaxy was full of intelligent species with different strengths and abilities. No single species, not even humans, could survive and thrive alone. She said that humans wanted to learn from other species, to share knowledge and resources, to explore the universe. Together, the war had taught them that diversity was strength and cooperation was more powerful than conquest. Admiral Gorthal was silent for a long time after Stone finished speaking. Finally, he asked her what would happen if the hegemony refused her offer. Stone's response was simple and honest. She told him that humans would continue to defend themselves and their allies, but she also said that humans hoped it would never come to that. She said they believed that former enemies could become the strongest friends. Zextai stood up slowly, his old joints creaking. 3 days later, the hegemony High Council agreed to peace negotiations. Within a year, the war was officially over. Within 5 years, humans and hegemony forces were working together to explore new regions of space. The Battle of Edge Nebula was the last time humans and the hegemony fought as enemies.